All right, so it is Tuesday, February 14th, and week one is in the books. And we're now going to go ahead and kick off and start week two. And so what I'll typically do is at the beginning of each Zoom session each week is I'll go ahead and pull the syllabus up here and point out the activities that we just completed. And pull up the activities that we just completed, which was the Module 1 discussion on the Linux and Python review. And a quick note on that, pay very careful attention to what the discussion topic is actually asking you, and make sure that you meet all of the requirements. This week, I kind of went ahead and graded it very soft, very easy. But when it's asking you to point out certain things or to respond to another learner, make sure that you remember to do that. And then we had Lab 112, and we had Lab 122, which was our Linux review lab. And then we had Lab 133 and the Module 1 exam. And we're going to take a look at the Module 1 exam just to go over things to make sure everybody's clear on each of the questions for the Module 1 exam. Now, remember that each week, depending on what the activity is, so for the DevNet Resources Lab this week and the project activity, which I'm going to go into detail about tonight, there won't be any tutorial videos for these, right? So 227 is kind of like a treasure hunt exam that you're going to do on the developer.cisco.com site. And then the activity for the project is going to be team formation. And I actually have the teams already set up. There's going to be 3 teams of 3. And then I'll point out where you can go to look to see what it is your team needs to do. And there's a PDF that is part of that activity. So Dwayne brought up for 227 that it didn't show the attachment here. And I don't believe it does. I think I actually looked at it as well. And it's not here. Remember, any of the lab activities that we're doing, if you go into Netacad and you go to that chapter and then you look at 2.2 and we have 2.2.7, you can see Lab Explore DevNet Resources. You can access all of the labs from the online course, right, from the book, or the online book, I should say. So if I was to close that out, you can also take a look at the course index. If you deselect all and then come down and click on labs, it will actually show you every single lab for every single chapter, or I should say module, for every single module. So if you couldn't find 227, or if it wasn't there, you could come here, take a look and say, okay, I'm curious about this. I'm going to download this lab. And so I'll just click download and we'll save that lab and I'm saving it because I'll upload it into the course room. That way it's there to save you from having to come into the book and get it. But remember, any lab that you see referenced in the syllabus, you can access via the online course. All right, so this week, since we got off to a good start last week, I noticed that there were a number of learners who did not submit anything for Lab 133. So I'm going to go ahead and open this activity back up in terms of the due date for the activity, and I'll push it out until the 20th, and that is next week. Yeah, I'm going to push it out to the 20th. So if you want to go back and knock that out, I will give you full credit for 133. Everybody pretty much had 122 done, but for 133, if you want to go back and redo something or do it, actually, if you didn't get a chance to knock it out, I've just went ahead and extended that for you in the syllabus. All right, so, excuse me. I feel like I have a sore throat coming on. All right, so this week we've got Explore DevNet Resources, and I'm going to talk about the Cisco DevNet site here. We've got the project activity, and we'll talk about that as we move on. And the Module 2 exam has already been activated. So as promised, you get 10 attempts on the Module 2 exam. Each attempt has been set for a maximum of 5 hours, right? And hopefully you guys are enjoying being able to focus on the learning of the material through the module exams and not so panicked about the grades. And the grades from the module 1 exam certainly reflected that you guys are taking advantage of those multiple attempts, and the scores were really, really good. All right, so any question about the week 1 activities that were due to be turned in last night at midnight, and then the week 2 activities that we have on deck here? And again, I'm going to go into detail on each of these as we move through module 2. And lab 133 has been extended. So if you didn't get it done, this is a great opportunity to do that. Now, in addition to that, if you reference either the announcement that I sent out, I'm trying to remember if it's this announcement here. Yeah. So this announcement here, if you go into these announcements, if you get stuck, right, or if you wanted to see what it looks like to complete these parts, and when I say part, inside the PDF for the lab activity, it'll say, you know, part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. So I've broken these videos down into the individual parts to make it a little bit easier. Like if you're stuck on lab 122 part 4, you can come in and you could follow along with the video if you wanted to see what it is I'm doing. And the same is true with lab 133. So for any of the labs where we actually have, you know, sort of hands-on command line type stuff that we're going to be working with, especially when it comes to the Python programming piece, I'll be doing videos up for every single lab. Again, the lab that you're going to be doing this week, which is, I can't remember, I think it's 227, the one where you're looking for a resource. It's kind of like a scavenger hunt type thing. So I'm going to go ahead and not do a video for that, as you're just going to be floating around, clicking on the website, looking for things. Ryan's got a question here. No, yeah, so the Python review was graded, and you needed to turn in I think it was part 7, is it part 7 or maybe part 5? One of the parts in there asked you to write a script, to create a script. And that's what needed to be turned in. Again, if I was to go back into our announcements here, and no, that was a correction, and I'll be able to tell you here in just a second. And this is why I put the emails in as the announcement, so I don't have to go dig around. Yeah, so for step 4, you could upload, Ryan, you could upload that in like Word, Notepad, text edit, whatever the case may be. So yeah, so you have this week to do that. And again, the step-by-step execution of that can be found in here if you run into any trouble. Again, you get full credit for it. If you guys do the work, I'm going to give you the credit for it. Yeah, no worries, no worries. Definitely make sure that if you're struggling or you feel like maybe your Python skills aren't up to par, when I make these videos, they're more than just type this command, type this command, type this command. Okay, the activity's done. They really kind of get into, okay, well, here's how you could do it this way. Here's some other options. Here's some different command line type stuff that you can do. Here's how you would do it in VS Code. Here's how you would do it in idle if you wanted to do that. So definitely take a look at those if you feel like you're stuck, or if the Python is a little bit advanced for where you might be, right? All right. So with that, the next thing that I wanted to cover is there were some links that I had in the email I sent out initially that were kind of there for some support, right? And so I want to touch on those real briefly here, because again, these are supports for you to leverage to, again, kind of help you become self-sufficient. So the first one, and we kind of looked at this on the first night, where we downloaded the most recent version of Python and I installed it, and then we fired up where's the icon? There it is. And we fired up the integrated development learning environment, right? Idle. And so that was one way on the host machine that we could run Python, the latest version of Python, right? And if I click on it, you should notice this is the interactive interpreter for Python. If I wanted to create files like I'm doing in VS Code, I would just simply go File, New File, and then I could type in my code here. So for example, in the lab, they gave you the code that you actually needed to run for a number of the activities in there. And so you could actually maybe test that here, right? Or you could test it from the interactive interpreter. Remember, keep it in mind that when you're working in the interactive interpreter, this is what I like to refer to as sort of non-persistent or ephemeral. And what that means is so I'm doing my Python in here, right? I'm typing all my stuff in. I've set up some variables, created some Python objects, whatever the case may be. As soon as I quit from the interactive interpreter, it's all gone. Everything is gone that I was doing in there. Now, that's why you might want to create a file, because a file, in order to run it, right, it's going to force you, well, actually, I didn't have anything in there. So if I put something in here and I go run module, it's going to force me to save it, right? And again, this is on your host machine, so you don't have to do it on the host machine, right? You've got that virtual machine, and I don't want to save those changes. You have the virtual machine, and I'll talk about that in a second. Again, just kind of recapping some things. The Python enhancement proposal, we looked at number 8, PEP 8, which talks about the 4 spaces for indentation. Now, a really, really good support, and if you're looking at doing Python long-term, and even for this course, this is definitely one to bookmark, realpython.com, right? And they have some really, really amazing tutorials in here. So for example, if you're like not sure what, how do I deal with a Python list, right? So if you just type in lists, you can see right here, linked list, that's not what we want. And we're looking for something, you can see they have like intermediate. So here you go, lists and tuples in Python. Okay, well, let me see what Python lists. What are some of the things that are curious about Python lists? They're ordered, can contain arbitrary objects. So again, this is a really good site to come through, and they have some additional Python examples that you can use that are definitely good. The next resource is Stack Overflow, right? And this is an amazing place to come to look resources or to look answers up to questions, that you might be curious about. And I think, yeah, I am logged in right now. So one word of advice here, though, is I would be very careful about posting questions up, because people can get really, really snippy in some of the in the groups here and answering questions, especially if you post up a question that maybe has been posted before. So if I was to pull a question I posted, was it 6 years ago? So 6 years ago, I wanted to know about getting, what was it, the memory address? I can't remember what I was doing. Anyway, I posted this question up. Nobody had posted the question before. And the first person to respond comes back and says, why would you want to do that? Right? And so you typically when you're asking questions, you get a lot of stuff. People start arguing about whether it's the best way to do it. But if you're not posting up, right, if you're not posting questions up, this is a great forum to come search for maybe some answers in Python if you get stuck. So the next link is Google has a Python class. And again, this is a free class. It's really, really good. And this gentleman here, Nick Parlante, he's from Stanford University. He teaches computer science at Stanford. And he does a really, really good job. In fact, this is the link that is in the first the email I sent that had all the links in it. And he is basically just goes through and walks through a whole bunch of basic Python stuff, right? And he's a little quirky, right? But again, he's really, really good. So I dropped this video in there as well. And then finally, and I think that you're going to be happy to see this, right? So it's forced me to log in again. So ChatGPT, which I highlighted in one of the tutorial videos, is sort of becoming like the de facto type thing to use to search, right? Or to ask questions for. So for example, I use the example of the, what was it? The code that you needed to produce in order to satisfy lab 133, right? It asked you to do a program and then it gave you some criteria, right? So you could say, can you write me a Python program that prompts the user for input and puts that input into a list, right? And so ChatGPT, which for those of you that aren't familiar with ChatGPT, it's AI, artificial intelligence. This can be really, really helpful because it's going to show you, based on the criteria that you enter in, the code that would be required to instantiate a list, right? And then we've got this, it looks like it's going to run until you tell it that, until you don't enter something in. So if not item, so if no input gets put in, it's going to break out. But as long as you're entering things in, it's going to append those things to the list. And then at the very end, it's going to show you the items that were entered in. So let's copy this and we're going to step over here and we'll do it in the idle integrated development learning environment here. So if I was to paste that code in and then say F5, and I'll save this and we'll just call it ChatGPT GPT-002, I think is where I'm at. And we'll say .py. You can see it says enter an item, press enter to stop. Well, let's test that first. So I'm just going to hit enter. And you can see it says items entered and it shows me nothing. So if I run it again and we want to type some items in, I can put an integer in. Well, actually, that is going to go in as a string. So everything we enter in here is going to be a string. And who can tell me why is everything we are entering in, or that I'm going to be entering in here, why is it going to be a string? Anybody know the answer to that? And you can drop it in the chat if you want, or you could go ahead and shout out. Why is everything I'm entering in, like 99, why is that going to be a string? And this was one of the look-at questions from last week as well. Anybody remember? All right. So the reason that it's going to be a string, and remember this because this becomes important, is that the input function, right? The built-in Python function input will return a string by default. Now, we can force it to return an integer, but we don't want everything to be integers because everything may not be integers. But strings, we can do that. So I could say 99, I can put my name, Travis B. I could put AACC. We could put a tuple in here, right? I could put a list. Again, it's all going to be treated as if it was a string. And we could even put a dictionary in here with a key and then a value. Right? And then I hit enter when I'm done, and you can see that it puts all those things in there in that list, but they're all strings. Now, why do I know that those are all strings? From looking at that output, how can you tell those are all strings? What do you think?
Is it one question or, yeah, I want to say, I guess like one question or one statement per line? Or it's asking that one line's asking one specific thing?
So you're close, right? So it is asking for one specific thing, but based on what I have highlighted right there, when you look at that, what do all of those elements have in common that would indicate that they're strings? What do you think? Yeah, so Christy, excellent, because they've got the single quotes around each of the elements. So you see you got the single quotes around everything here, and the comma separates things out. So, oh, that's right, I can't clear the screen here. So remember, and I'm going to pull up, and yeah, you guys don't care about that. Okay, so let's take a step back, right? So there's some different data types in Python, and we're going to do a little waterfall activity here. So in the chat, I want you to type out all of the different Python data types that you remember, that you can remember, and that we've seen so far. So string, right? Strings is one. What are some of the other data types that we've worked with? So go ahead and type in as many as you can think of. Yeah, Boolean. Dwayne, excellent. Boolean. Dylan, yep, string and integer. Good, yep, integer. What else? What are some of the other data types? Go ahead and keep going there. Okay, yeah, no, so Dylan, yeah, so the double and the char, or the char, those are for C, the C programming language. So we haven't discussed those in this class. So, but that's good though. Those are certainly data types. Yep, string, integer, Boolean, float, excellent. All right, there's two more that we've talked about and that you saw in the lab. Well, you saw one of them in lab 133. And then the other one we talked about, yes, excellent, Christy, good. The list, right? The list is going to become very, very important. And there's one more. Yes, Dwayne, excellent, the dictionary. So the integer, and I guess let me take a step back. So integers, floats, those are typically, they just refer to them as numbers, right? They'll say, oh, those are numbers, right? But to be specific, you would say, yeah, the integer data type, the float data type. So, and the string, those are considered the simple data types. The more complex data types would be the list and the dictionary. And the reason that those are considered more complex is because they can contain collections of all of the Python data types, right? And then tuple was one that didn't get mentioned. And tuples, we don't deal with tuples a whole lot, but it's good to know what they are, right? So again, it's just a refresher here, because I want to make sure that we're all on good footing, because this week is going to be a great week to try to get as much hands-on with Python as you can, because as soon as we go into chapter 3, we're going to start having some labs that are going to require some Python. So and then we'll be doing Python pretty much the rest of the way out for the course, including the final hands-on lab. If you haven't looked at that yet, it's all Python, right? The final hands-on project is all Python. The project that you're going to be working on in your teams as part of the team activity, that's going to be all Python. Now, you can use other programming languages if you want. However, Python's probably the easiest way to accomplish that task. So those are the data types we've talked about. So let's just review real briefly. So a string would simply be something that's enclosed in either double quotes or single quotes, right? And that would be considered a string. Who can tell me the command that I would need to run to check to see if my string is actually a string? And I have a feeling that Christy, based on her discussion post, will probably be first to this answer. What built-in Python function? Dylan beat Christy. Yes, it's type, right? So I can simply say type and put in here my string. And that's going to tell me what data type it is, right? That it's an object from class string. So it's a string data type. Now, I had mentioned you could use triple quotes, right? But that's not something that you would do in like a print statement. So the triple quotes, whether it's single or double, if there's 3 of them, it's typically reserved for what we call a doc string. And that's something that goes into functions, which we'll get into much later. Well, I shouldn't say much later on, but we get into later on, right? So right now, for strings, if you see something enclosed in single or double quotes, that means it's a string. So in other words, if I say my integer, and here's my trick question for this evening, is that an integer or is that a string? What do you think? You can dump it into the chat or you can shout it out. Yeah, that's a string because again, the variable name is just a variable name, right? I could call it my integer. I could say super integer, whatever the case may be. The bottom line is that value, that 99, is enclosed in quotes, right? So as soon as I put the quotes, whether it's single quotes or double quotes, around 99, it's no longer an integer. And who can remember the way that we refer to, and hopefully it was a mnemonic to help you remember, how Python does typing, as opposed to like a C program? How does Python, what do we say Python does in terms of data typing? Does anybody remember how I referred to it? Hoping that you would remember. Anybody remember? And remember, we referred to, we said, Python's going to look at it and say, well, if it walks like something and it quacks like something, then it's probably that data type. So we called it duck typing, right? D-U-C-K, right? Because if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, then it's probably a duck. And that's how Python approaches its data typing. In other words, how it determines, like, is that a string? Is that an integer? Is it a float? What is it? So Python doesn't do what C does. And again, it's kind of interesting because Python, at least the version that we're using, is written in the C programming language. And for those of you not familiar with C, and I just want to show you a quick example. Can you produce a quick example of a C program with integers, characters, and doubles? So Dylan will get an example here of what a C program would look like. And again, ChatGPT is an amazing resource. So hopefully this is going to make sense to you guys. And again, not all the syntax that's in here, but what I'm going to show you, which is right here. I'm waiting for, let me stop generating the information there. So right here, right? In a C program, take a look at what you have to do. You have to say, yeah, num1 is an integer and the value is 10. So you have to declare that's an integer, right? The letter A, I have to declare that's a character. Num2, which is a float in Python, in C, you have to say, yeah, num2, that's a double. So you have to declare up front, hey, this is an integer, this is a double, this is a character, right? That's strict typing. So Python uses loose typing, right? Or what we refer to as duck typing because, sorry, I'm in the wrong window here, because nowhere here did I say my integer that's a string. You see, I'm not saying the following, right? I'm not saying like car, my string, blah, right? I don't have to say that. Or I don't have to say the following. Int num gets 22. I don't have to declare it to be the data type that it is. Python is going to make a best guess. And it's pretty smart at how it does it, right? For strings, it's looking for those quotes. For an integer, it's looking for, say, num2. It's looking for a whole number, right? That's just a whole number. For a float, because Python doesn't use doubles, we would say, I'll just say my float, and we'll say 3.14. And so Python keys on, oh, there's a decimal in there. So that's a float because it's not a whole number. We have a decimal in there. In fact, what do you think Python is going to say the following is? And I'll just call this num3, and I'll say 3 point and hit enter. What do you think Python is going to tell us num3 is? What data type do you think we're going to get there? And you can dump it into the chat. All right, Christy says float. Anybody else? Thoughts? Hopefully you're still with me. Dylan, Dwayne, what do you think? Is it going to say that that's an integer, or is it going to say that that's a float? All right, Ryan says float, Dwayne says integer, and Dylan says float. So it's going to say that it's a float, and I don't know why we're verifying Microsoft Outlook there. It's going to say that it's a float because there's a decimal there. Even though nothing follows the decimal, when I say num3, it's going to say 3.0, right? So those are some of the different data types. Now let's spend a little bit of time here on the list in the dictionary. Now I commented last week, and hopefully this is going to resonate with you guys again. And you saw it in some of the you saw it in the program that I pulled up in ChatGPT even, which was in idle here. And you can see at the very beginning here, and let me do the following. Pull this down here. All right, so you can see at the very beginning, it creates an empty list in this program. And the reason that it does that, and again, I've never liked them when they're right next to each other. So the reason you would do this, and this is what's called instantiating. That's just a fancy way to say it's creating a Python list, right? And the name of the list is items. And the reason that we create the list right away is because we're going to be appending to that list later on. Because if the list doesn't exist and you try to append something to it, Python is not smart enough to say, oh, well, he's trying to append something to a list that doesn't exist, so let me create that list for him, and then we'll append whatever he wanted to append. Python doesn't do that. Python simply says, I have no idea what you want me to append this to because the list name that you gave me doesn't exist, right? And let me give you an example of that. So over here, if I say, and I think I may have already created my list, but if I create an empty list and I want to append something to it, here's how I would do that. And I can just append anything. I'll put my name in here. I'll append my name. So that's going to work. Now, if I say, oh, okay, well, let me append this thing to my list 22. And again, remember, my list is just simply a variable name. I could name the list just L, and sometimes you see that happen. And then I'll show you something that's annoying that you'll also run into. But here, take a look. Name error. My list 22 is not defined. Now, Python is smart enough to come back and say, hey, I do have a list, but it's called my list. Is that the list that you wanted to append to? So maybe, take a look and check it out. But you can see what happens when we try to append things, right? Or put things into the list if the list isn't there. So typically you'll do that if you're going to use a list somewhere later in the program to append things to, you would use that. Now, here's what's really annoying sometimes, is sometimes you'll see this, where for whatever reason, the convention gets used LST, because for some reason, I always look at that and think first, like it's one ST, right? So this is, you could create a list, and we'll just create an empty list called LST. Another convention is you just see the L all by itself. And like we saw when we were working with files, and I'll touch on that as well, sometimes you'll see file is a popular convention that gets used, but then you'll also see just the letter F. And I'm not a big fan of having just the letter F. I'd rather see file in there. When I do my stuff, I'd rather type in file than just F. Excuse me. So definitely things to be aware of. So now if I look at my list, you can see that I've got Travis in there. If I was to append some other stuff to that list, and let's drop in here, we'll drop 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we'll drop in some integers in there. Whoops. And what happened here? Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to do. Yeah, so we'll say my list 1, my list 2, my list 3, my list 4, 34. Okay, there we go. All right, so now my list has a few things in there. And so remember, in order to access these elements in the list, because a list is an ordered collection of things, of Python objects, right? So in order to access these elements, we would type in the name of the list. Whoops, and then you would type in the index position. Who remembers where Python starts counting? Anybody remember where Python starts counting?
0.
Excellent. So it starts at 0, meaning the first element is index position 0. The second element is index position 1. The third element is index position 2. The fourth element, index position 3. Who remembers how you can always get the last element out of the list, irrespective of the length of the list? -1. Good, Dylan. So I would say -1. And again, if I was to go back and append something to the list, like, let's put a big number in there that's kind of conspicuous, and then I say my list -1, it's not going to say 34 anymore. It's going to show me the last element in the list, right? So it's a really important convention. Now, the reason that lists and dictionaries are so important is going to become abundantly clear when we get into module, I keep saying chapter, when we get into module 3, because that's where you're going to be introduced to some different data presentation formats. And one of those formats is JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And it has, I'm going to make the following statement. It has nothing to do with JavaScript, right? Even though the name is JavaScript Object Notation, it has nothing to do with JavaScript except that it adopted the format of JavaScript, right? So, but it is not, JSON is not a programming language, right? It's a data representation function. It represents data in a specific way. So the reason that the list and the dictionary are so important is because in JSON, you're going to see what JSON refers to. They don't call it, JSON doesn't call it a dictionary. They call it an object, and they don't call it a list. They call it an array, but it's the exact same format as Python's lists and dictionaries. So they're really identical. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, do I have MapQuest up here? And let me see something real quick. And Dwayne, so if you wanted to delete, would it be my list amend? Well, let's take a look. So, and remember, this is where the interactive interpreter can be really helpful, is you could say my list period. And if you hit the tab key twice, it is going to give you a list of, not a Python list, but it's going to give you a list of options here. It gives you a list of all of the options that are possible. So you've got insert, extend, copy, clear. So we could clear the list, you could sort the list, and then there's a remove, right? So we might think it's remove, but what if I was to go out here real quickly and jump back out of, where did it go? Oh yeah. So this would be a great question. How do I remove an element from a Python list? Let's see what ChatGPT says. So ChatGPT is going to say that you can do it in several ways. We can use the remove method, and then they're going to give us an example, right? And there you go. You would give your list name .remove, and it removes element 3, right? Now, this is interesting because you always want to check when it says element, when it says element 3, it's not the index position, right? The delete is going to use the index position number. So this is good though, because you can see a number of ways to do this. So let me cruise back over here. And if I was to say my list remove, and and it has, of course, does anybody see the problem I'm going to run into when I say my list dot remove to, and remove is referred to as a method, right? Because it's inextricably linked to the list data type. So when I say my list remove 2, that could, if you looked at that, if you didn't know and you looked at that, if I said, yeah, let me run that, and of course we didn't get an error, so then I say I say my list, and the 2 is gone. However, was that the index position that I used, or did I actually give the argument here to the method? Was that the index position or the value? What do you think? So Dwayne says it's the index position. Now, Christy says value. Dylan, Ryan, what do you think?
Actually, I think it was a coincidence that, because Travis would be 0, 1 would be 1, and 2 would be 2 there.
Right,
So
and that's
one of those.
kind of what I was hinting at, is that the example I was going to give you using 2, which is that was, for whatever reason, that's what popped into my head, like, oh, we'll do remove 2. And then I looked at the list and I was like, okay, well, that's going to cause confusion because 0, 1, 2. So it's not clear. Is that the value that I'm saying, remove the value, or do I remove by index position? And so what's going to happen here is that's actually the value, because watch this. If I say my list dot remove 34, do we have an index position 34?
No.
We don't. The index positions are 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 right now. That's it. So this conclusively proves that when you use remove, you're saying remove the value. So if I wanted to get rid of my name, which would have been an even better example, I'd put the string Travis in there, right? My list, and Travis is gone. So when you're using remove, remember, it's the value that you're going to put inside the parentheses there. Does that make sense, or is everybody good on that? Any questions on that? Okay, so remove, again, is going to use the value. Now, there's another way I can remove things. Maybe, I don't know the value. What if I was to tell you, yeah, I need you to remove the last element of the list, but you can't see the list, it's got a million things or whatever. You can use delete, right? And if you look over here, you can see delete is going to remove the element at the index position. So both of these are common ways to do it, right? It really depends on the use case, right? What is your program doing? Am I prompting the user for, maybe you say something like this in your program, enter the name of the person you want to delete from the list. And so they put in Bob, right? And then you don't know what index position Bob is at, so it would make sense that you use remove, right? That's a use case where remove makes more sense because you don't know where Bob is in that list. So we're just going to remove Bob based on the name, Bob. But maybe the use case is, I've got this list and I want to remove the last element in the list. Yes, Christy, and that's exactly what delete does, is it does it by index. So how do we index into that list and always guarantee that we're going to get the last element in that list? How do we do that? What value would I put in here for an index position? Exactly, -1. Let's see if this works with delete. Absolutely. So now when I say my list, the only values, the only elements that should be in that list anymore at this point are 1 and 3. And there you have it. And so if I reran that command again, what's left in that list right now? What's the only value that's going to be left in that list? Yep, Christy, you got it. It's going to be 1. So if I was to say my list, there it is. That's the only value that's left in that list. And again, it's really important to understand how you are accessing elements that are in a list. And I'm going to show you one last example, a little bit more advanced example. So we have my list, right? So I'm going to append to my list another list. And actually, let me do this. Let me do stuff. And then let me do some more. We'll put a tuple in here, 1, 2. And then I'm going to put a list in here. So we're going to append, because you can have, remember, a list, and I don't know. Oh, they're up over here. I'll grab them at the break. So I actually bought these specifically for this analogy, right? So you're going to have to visualize this. I'll have a visual after the break for you. But when you go to the supermarket, right? Not a shopping cart, but the little, the little handheld things that you can pick up by the door. It's not like as big, it's like the little, I don't even want you to, it's like a handheld thing, right? That you put your groceries in if you're only going to pick up like 2 or 3 things. So I want you to think of a list as that thing, that little thing you pick up by the door that you dump a couple groceries in, right? Because a list, just like that little handheld shopping cart thing, you can put integers in there. You can put strings in there. You can put dictionaries in there. In fact, you could put another handheld cart in there, right? So you can put lists inside of lists. And think of a list as sort of like a Swiss Army knife. If I want to collect up a whole bunch of different values that are different data types, the Python list is the hands down way to do it, right? This is the best way to keep a list of a whole bunch of things in an ordered fashion that are all, and again, even if they're the same data type, this is still a great, super flexible way to do it, is to use a list. You just need to remember that it's ordered, and that's how you're accessing, right, or getting those values out of the list to display out of the list, is you're using an index position. So I'm going to append a list here, and I'm going to put 7, 8, 9, right? So those 3 integers, 7, 8, and 9, are in that list. So let's take a look at my list now. And we can see here that my list is made up of 1, 2, 3, 4 elements, right? This element is at index position 0 because it's the first element. This element is at index position 1 because it's the second element. This element is at index position 2 because it's the third element. And our list that's inside of my list is at index position 3 or -1. Now, when you're dealing with JSON data, right, and we haven't seen that yet, I'll pull up an example for you, but you haven't seen JSON data yet in the course, or at least I haven't talked about it with you. So you'll run into scenarios where you have a list and maybe it's turn-by-turn directions. And then inside that list, every maneuver or every turn is a list like this, right? So you've got the main list, my list, but then each turn is a list inside of that main list. So if I say, well, let me ask you guys, how can I access that list? I want Python to print up that list for me out of my list. So what command would I run? Go ahead and type that into the chat here, and let's see who can get that correct. What command would I type in here right now to get my list, or to get Python to print just the list 7, 8, 9 for me? What do you think? Any takers? And again, we want to get that value, which is the list 7, 8, 9. We want that value to be printed up, and that value only out of the list. What do you think that might be? Even if you had to guess, what would you think it would be? What's the first thing that comes to your mind as to how I would print out just that element from my list? Good. Christy. Good. Very close. Very close. And so remember, we're in the interactive interpreter. And this is one of the things I know causes confusion. When we're in the interactive interpreter, I don't have to say print because, and you had the parentheses there. So again, remember when we're accessing, so Dwayne, you're close, right? So you guys are all saying print dot, right? Ryan saying delete my list. No, we don't want to delete my list, right? So the print dot my list, remember when you're using the print, it's a function. So that's going to have the open parentheses and you could say my list. Now, remember when we're in the interactive interpreter, I don't need to say print, at least not here. I wouldn't need to say print. I could just say my list. So if we look at what Christy has there, my list, now she used the parens, but remember with the list, to access the list, we use the brackets, right? But you're right, Christy, it is -1. And so that prints out 7, 8, 9. So it prints that list out for us. Now that you know the answer to print out the list from my list, which is this list here, 7, 8, 9, how do I print out only the 8 from that list? So how would I do that? Because we need to build off that command right there. So what would be one way to do that? I only want the number 8 out of this list right here that is inside of my list. How would we do that? What do you think? So I know that my list -1 gives me that list. So how do I index into that list and get the number 8? What do you think? Even if it's a guess. Yeah, so Christy, boy, you love the parentheses. You love the parentheses. You're very close. Yeah, so again, here in the interactive interpreter, we would just use the brackets again, but Christy, you're correct. It's the 8 inside that list is at index position 1. So hopefully everybody sees that. And again, these are the brackets here because we're dealing with a list. Okay, so how would I print out, what would be the answer to print out the number 9? How would we do that? And again, you don't need the print statement to do that. You simply need the name of the list like I have here on the screen, and then these other values. All right, Dwayne says 2. Dwayne, you are correct. What is another way I could get the number 9 to print? I could use index position 2 inside of that list, 7, 8, 9, because 2, right? Remember, that's the 0 index position, 1 and 2. And it wouldn't be 2 plus 1. How would I access the last element in that list right there? There you go, Dwayne, you got it, -1. So I could say my list, -1, -1. I could say my list, -1, 2. Is there another way for me to get that number 9 by changing this value from -1 to something else? What do you think? Any ideas? So it wouldn't be the string 9. I'm talking about if you're indexing into the first list, right? Remember, we said my list -1 to get the last element in this list, my list. But -1 is one way to do it. Dwayne just answered the question over here that, well, if I look, that's 0, 1, and 2. So I could do -1, -1, but I could also do -1, 2. So how would I do it with making that a positive number on the first list, my list, and still get that that list that's the last element, but not use the -1? Does anybody see what that might be? It wouldn't be 2, right? Because 2 is going to be 0, 1, and then the tuple would be 2. There you go. Dylan's got it. My list 3, 2. Whoops, there it is. All right. My list 3, 2. And so that's how we can index into the lists. All right. So it is 7:55. And before we break, what questions do you have about what we've covered so far? We're going to go into dictionaries. And again, I just want to make sure we cover Python, because Python's going to become important as we get into a number of the labs and the project later on. So what questions do you have about Python? Strings, lists, integers, floats, the print statement? What do you got? No questions. Nobody has any questions? Too many and not enough hours in the day to ask. All right. Well, remember, ChatGPT is your friend. All right. So Ryan had a question. When you simply put my list, and remember, Ryan, remember, we're using, I know this is a little confusing, and this is technically, we call this the grammar, right? Just like in English, there's grammar that you try to follow to speak correctly. In Python, there's grammar that we follow, and just think of it as like syntax, right? The syntax we're using. So if it's a list and we're trying to index into the list, we want to use the bracket, not the curly brace, right? So we want to use the bracket. So Ryan's question is, when you simply put my list -1, and it says it's just the last 3 integers, and sorry about that, put an extra one there. So no, it's not the last 3 integers, it's that list. So this is another list, because again, it's inside the brackets. If it's inside the brackets, it's a list. Like if I say my list, and again, think of a list as like the little handheld shopping thing at the supermarket, where you just put all your different food items in there. And a list in Python is very similar, because you're just putting in all the different data types. I mean, they could all be the same, right? But the thing about the list that's so cool is you can put a string in there. You can put an integer in a list, and you put them all in there together, right? And that's okay in a list. In C, in the C programming language, and other programming languages, it's a little more strict as to what you can put in lists, in what they call arrays, which are similar to the list. All right. I did say ChatGPT. Yeah. And so if you go to, and you can sign up for an account, it's totally free. Just Google ChatGPT, and it'll bring you to like a main page where you can click to sign up. But then once you get in here, you can say, can you show me examples of all the Python data types? Whoops, types. And we'll hit enter, and ChatGPT is going to hook you up, right? So you got numeric types, int, float, complex, and then it's going to show you examples of that. And then you got Booleans, and the Booleans are easy, right? Because Booleans are either true or false. There's only 2 values. It's true or false, that's it. And then, hey, here's some string. This actually is turning out to be pretty valuable right here, right? So sequence types, a string, a list, a tuple, and there's examples of each. A dictionary, there's an example of a dictionary with key value pairs. And then, oh, set type, yeah, we don't deal with sets, frozen sets, byte array. I don't think we're going to see any of that in our course. But again, it shows you all of the different data types, and it gives you examples. So yeah, ChatGPT is really, really good. And yeah, so Christy says, I really wish I knew about ChatGPT in my Java class. And I wish ChatGPT was around. I was teaching an honors Java course at Crofton High School. What year did I teach there? 2021 to 22? Yeah, so I think it was fall of 21 to summer 22 was what it was. But yeah, no, the same thing, right? So and it's not just ChatGPT doesn't just know about Python, right? So I could say something like, can you show me examples of all the Java data types, right? And ChatGPT is going to say, here are some examples of Java data types, numeric types. Now, again, Java is a different programming language. And you'll notice right away, take a look, Java makes you declare the data type. You have to specify, you have to say, okay, this is an int, this is a float, this is a double, this is a Boolean. In Python, we don't have to do that. And that's, like I said, no curly braces in Python. And I'm going to talk about indentation when we come back from break. But again, ChatGPT, I'm telling you right now, this is one of the most underrated learning tools that's out there. It's a recent thing, right? And in the middle of the day, you may get a thing that pops up and says, hey, ChatGPT is too busy to help you right now. And that's happened to me a couple times. But again, ChatGPT can really give you a lot of assistance and sort of like, a hand up if you've got questions that you're thinking about. And I mean, just come in and type the question and see what ChatGPT tells you, because you can build off that question. So I could say something like this, okay, using the data types you just showed me, because again, it's like a conversation. Can you create a quick Java program? And so now ChatGPT knows that we're having this conversation, knows about the data types it just showed me, and then here we go. And if you like the curly brace, which I despise the curly braces, here we go. So here is a quick program using all the data types that ChatGPT and I were just talking about, right? So again, you can do the same thing with Java. If you're taking other programming courses, this is really an amazing learning tool and learning aid to kind of help get you going and give you examples as to how you might do things. Now, one thing to be careful of with ChatGPT, and again, this will be the last thing I say before we take a quick 10-minute bio snack break here, but be very careful, right? Be very careful. Because what I've noticed, and I gave this as an example in the tutorial video that I provided the link for, is watch what happens when I say, can you please print a subnetting table that goes from /32 to /8. And if it's the same table that I'm anticipating it's going to be, I want you to watch what happens here. Yep, this is probably the same thing. And my guess is it's not fixed yet. And it's this usable range column, or I should say, column right here. So watch what happens. And actually, it's funny, it's putting in different values. So what it did the other day, and you can see that that's wrong, right? I wanted, you know what, here, let me say with, do the subnetting table with usable IP addresses. And what's going to happen is it should print it out, and I think it said 0, and then it just put 2 for the number of usable IPs for every single, and it looks like they may have fixed it here. Although the usable range thing over here still is not making much sense, but let's see if they've got it right now. ChatGPT thinking, they may have fixed it. Because the other day it came up, said usable number of usable IPs, and it would say 0, and then everything was 2. And we know that that's not the case. But here you can see number of host IPs. This is correct now. So this is artificial intelligence. Apparently ChatGPT, maybe from chatting with me, was learning something. Who knows? Okay, well, let's go ahead. I'm going to pause. We'll take a break. And let me pause the recording here real quick. And then we will, hold on, it's not, maybe it's because it's generating. So we're going to take a quick, there we go, take a quick 10-minute break, and I will see you guys at 8:15. All right, so we are back. It is 8:15, and so we're going to wrap things up. So just to kind of close the loop on a couple of things. So, and I need to turn the picture on here so I can see, so make sure you guys can see. So this, I actually ordered this. I think I can't remember where I ordered it from, but it was basically to show the example of, like, you know, this is a Python list, and you can put all these different food items in here, you know, like the meat, the dairy, the eggs. You know, I could put in what is it, tomato, a lemon, and I guess that's onions. And then there was even an extra one of these that came with it. And, you know, you could say, there you go, I've got a list inside the list. So that was what I was talking about earlier, is that you can just put all the different data types inside of a list. And then here is an example of JSON data. And this is a JSON object, and that's what JSON calls data that's inside the curly braces here. But if we were to look at this as a Python dictionary, which has the exact identical syntax, you've got your keys, like a key and then a value, and the value here is a dictionary, right? And what I wanted to show you earlier, and this is the MapQuest API that you can use. You can write a Python program that can actually query the MapQuest API server and say, hey, give me directions. You do this in chapter 4, actually, where you write a Python program that's going to prompt the user. You know, you're going to say, hey, where are you at right now, and where do you want to go? And then it'll produce the JSON data here that are the directions. And you can see we've got the maneuvers. And so the maneuvers is the key, and the value is a Python list. And inside that list are a bunch of elements, and those elements are dictionaries that are inside the list, right? So again, this is a lot. There's a bunch going on here, and we'll get to that soon enough. But that's the MapQuest API. And this is just an example of what JSON data looks like, right? It's identical to the Python list and the Python dictionary. Okay, so make sure I've got that up. Yeah, Dylan says, I don't know, Prof. ChatGPT is never wrong. It is definitely wrong. It's definitely been wrong in the past. All right. But it's, like I said, it's a super learning tool. So here's what we're going to talk about now. We're going to talk about Python dictionaries, and then I'm going to talk about indentation, right? So a Python dictionary, and I'll just say D for my dictionary here, and we can create the dictionary. I can create an empty dictionary, and that's what you might want to do if you're at the beginning of the program, or I could go ahead and I could put my key value pairs in here. And so think of a dictionary is exactly like the name describes it, right? Like if you open up a dictionary, you're looking for the word, and you find the word in the dictionary, and then what's the value? The value is the definition. So let's do some of that, right? So I'll say, I think of a word here, water, right? And so there's my key, and then what is my value? Well, the value would be the definition. And so you would put, you know, water is made up of, and I'll stick with the old school, H2O, right? And I guess we'll just do lowercase, H2O. I think it's an O, not a 0. But anyway, so that's your definition. And then if I wanted to put another key value pair in the dictionary, I could. And I'll put the key in here as another word, and I'm just like looking around for, okay, paper, right? So paper. And the definition, or one of the definitions, is paper is made from trees, right? So right there, I have a Python dictionary. How can I check? I can say type D, right? And again, D is just the variable name. I could have named it anything that's a valid variable name. So you can see it's from class dictionary. It's an object from class dictionary. And so now I want to access so dictionaries, right? For our purposes, the dictionary is an unordered list of things. Now, technically, current versions of Python are doing behind the scenes some magic behind the curtain where it is keeping track of an order. But for our purposes, what we're going to say here is dictionaries don't have an order, right? So I wouldn't say D0. Yeah, because look, it comes back and it says key error. Like, I don't know what key 0 is. Well, what about index position 1 in my dictionary? Remember, dictionaries, we access the values in the dictionary based on the key. So I would say D, and here's one thing that's a little bit confusing. With dictionaries, we use the same syntax. What did I say, water? We use the same syntax that we would use with a list to get, you see what I'm saying? We use the same syntax with the brackets, but we put the key in instead of the index position. So that's the way you can think of it. How do I access and get the values out of a list? I put the index position. How do I access and get the values out of a dictionary? You're going to put the key, right? You're going to put the key. Now, the key can also be an integer. So what might be confusing is if you're using for your keys, for example, if I was to add something to the dictionary, I would add it like this. The number 0 is cool, right? So now where it gets a little confusing is if I say D0, because the question is, well, are you accessing a dictionary or a list, right? Now, we know we're accessing a dictionary because we're doing this right here, but this, again, this is where it can cause a little confusion for learners if the keys in the dictionary just happen to be integers, right? Like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As opposed to a string, right? And a string is like the key water, and then we get the definition for water. If I wanted to see the value for paper, I would do it like that, right? Now, if I don't put it in quotes, right, the key, it's going to come back and tell me name error. Paper is not defined, right? Because that's not a string. Again, for it to be a string, I would need to have single quotes or double quotes around it. So Python is going to say, hey, I don't know what you're talking about there. Name, that's a problem, right? So that's how you can create an empty dictionary. That's how you can create a dictionary with some things in it. And that's how you access the elements in the dictionary. You do it the exact same way that you access the elements of a list, except instead of using the index position, the dictionary is unordered. We're going to go off key value. We're going to go off the keys, right? If I want the value, I need to provide the key, right? If you want to unlock the door to get the value, you have to have the key. So that's a dictionary. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about here is the indentation. And especially since I know I've got some Java and C programmers with some background there, Python doesn't use the curly braces to group together blocks of code like you see with Java or the C programming language. And again, if I was to go back to our examples that we ran with ChatGPT, right? You see these curly braces here. This is how Java is grouping together all of this code, is with these curly braces, which are a nightmare when you start to get a lot of those curly braces. The same thing with the C programming language, which I thought we had. Yeah, you can see the C programming language uses these curly braces. Again, it's to group together blocks of code that go together. Python does not do that. Python uses indentation. So for a while statement here, a while loop, I say while true, and what do I want it to do as long as the condition is true? Well, I want it to do these things here that are indented underneath 4 spaces in underneath the while loop. And Christy, I think I made a comment to you in your activity for 133, where let me ask you, what do you think is going to happen if I do this? If I indent that print statement and we run this program, I want you to watch what's going to happen here. So you can see right here, it says, okay, and you see what it did before, and it only printed out items entered one time at the very end when the loop had terminated. So here, watch what happens. Now that I have print indented 4 spaces, Python thinks that this is part of the while loop, and it's going to run every single time until I just hit enter with no item. So I'll just put in here 1, 2, 3, and you see what it's doing? It's printing out the things I'm putting in the list, right? Every single time, because this is indented. So Python says, oh, you've indented this 4 spaces, just like these other lines here. Those all fall under the while loop. That is different. Oops, sorry, I don't want to do that. That is different than this. This does not have that print statement entered or spaced in 4 spaces along with the rest of this block of code here. Now, for C programmers and for Java programmers, this is a little bit annoying. However, not having to deal with where's my starting open curly brace? Okay, where's the closing curly brace underneath it here? And then what about for that block? And then this one, and then they're nested, and it's a mess. This is so, I love Python for this feature alone, is that when you want to group things together, you simply indent those lines of code. So if I run it now, with the print statement is not indented, it's only going to put in here. You can see it's not printing out what's in there. It's only going to do it at the very end. It does it one time. So this code runs and runs and runs. And as soon as I don't put something in, right, I press enter by itself without entering something, it's going to break out of the loop. And then it comes down to this line of code, because this is the first line of code after the indented code that's part of the while loop. And so it only runs one time. So I know it's a little odd, right? Because it's different than C, it's different than Java, and it's sort of, you know, JavaScript, the same thing. It's different than JavaScript, right? And it takes some time to get used to it, but I think you'll come to enjoy it more because you're not keeping track of those curly braces everywhere, trying to figure out like, okay, I opened it, where do I close it? Is this one nested under here? So it's a lot easier from that perspective, right? All right, now I'm going to show you a couple tricks here. And what just happened there? All right, sorry, looking at my notes. Oh, real quickly. So let's do a quick waterfall here in the chat to make sure we've got everybody with us. Type in as many Python built-in functions as you can think of. And I've got one of them right there on the screen. I'll give it away, the print function, right? What other built-in functions have we used so far? Type in as many as you can think of as fast as you can. Python built-in functions. Yep, good. Type, excellent, Ryan. So good, Michelle. Yeah, if, we'll take if will work. And that's a control flow structure. So Dwayne, float is a data type. Yeah, there you go, Christy. Print, while, if, elif, else. We've already got type. So here, let me pull up. So let's see what ChatGPT says. Hey, ChatGPT, can you please print a list of all the built-in Python functions? And I think there's 64 65 or 67 or something like that, 60 something. And so here you go. ChatGPT is printing for me a list. Yeah, Dwayne, good, def, for creating a function. Good. So here are all of the built-in functions, right? So ChatGPT is definitely your friend. Now, if you didn't want to use ChatGPT, if you come to the python.org site and you look at the documentation, right, we can take a look at 3.11, and I can search in here and look for built-in functions. And where are we at here? Our parse. Thought it was going to take us out to, oh, built-in. There we go. No, built-in functions. So it should have given me a little bit better. And you can see, right, this is a little bit more difficult, not as nice and clean as, and I thought there's a single page that'll show me. Let's just do built-ins. Oh, there we go. Oh, well, that's going to import the built-in. So hold on. So I'm telling you, there's a page that will show you, and maybe Google would be the way to go. But if you search for built-in Python functions, I think there's like 67 of them or something like that. And ChatGPT produced a pretty good list. How many of those were there? 68. All right, there we go. I was close. So there's 68 built-in functions in Python, right? And there's a list of those built-in functions. And some of the ones that we've seen, len, right, to give you the length of something. There's integer, right? If you want to convert something to an integer, there's a string, str. There it is right there. What else do we got up here? Dir, when we want to see a list of the variables that we have. All right. So I'm going to show you what's referred to as an Easter egg. And you can even ask ChatGPT about this and it'll show you. So here's something that's pretty cool. If I say import this, right? And Python has a bunch of little Easter eggs in there. There's one that'll even print up a picture of a cow saying whatever you tell it to say, which is pretty cool. So when I say import this, this is what's referred to as the Zen of Python, right? And we call it an Easter egg because it's like this little hidden thing that's not actually used, you know, for your programming purposes, but it's this cool little thing. It's a poem about why Python is, or how you should follow, or how would I say this basically? So the Zen of Python is basically what you're striving for in your Python code, right? So beautiful is better than ugly, explicit is better than implicit, simple is better than complex, so forth and so on. And if you ask ChatGPT to show you the other Python Easter eggs, it will show them to you. And Dwayne, you said the list I'm running is giving the name and description for each. Oh, yeah, it very well may. It very well may. And I could have said, so with ChatGPT, I could come back over and say, okay, can you give me a description of each of those two? And ChatGPT is going to do what it does. And there we go. Would be a lengthy process, but here's a brief summary. And there you go. And so for all 68 of those, it's going to go ahead and give you a little brief summary as to what it does. So I'm telling you, ChatGPT is your friend, especially in a programming course. All right. So now let's talk about week number 2. And some of the things we're going to be looking at here, first and foremost, is going to be explore DevNet resources. So if you go to developer.cisco.com, and I've been here a whole bunch, you're going to want to log in with your Cisco ID. So this is the same credential that you use to log into Netacad, right? So let me get logged in here real quick. And this, again, is another amazing resource. Now, there are a billion things on this website, so we're going to make this really, really easy, right? Make it super, super easy. So when you log into cisco.developer.com, I'm going to send you to documentation. Now, for the lab, you're going to have to be kind of searching around and looking for things. It's like I said, it's like an Easter egg hunt, right? So I'm sorry, I'm going to click on DevNet. Whoops, and it just flew right by. I'm going to click on DevNet Resources is what I'm going to click on. So I'll click on DevNet Resources, and you can see it says getting started with DevNet, or with what DevNet has to offer. So there's a start now. They've got different learning tracks. There's video courses that you can take. There's a sandbox you can mess around in. So I'm going to click on learning tracks and take a look. Coding and API fundamentals, networking 101, enterprise networking. And so you can pull any of these courses, and this is all free, right? You can pull any of these up and start to take a look, like coding and API fundamentals. This is probably one that you might want to take a look at. REST. What are APIs? What is REST? Give me an example of authentication. What are the components of a REST API request, right? And you can see here, it breaks all that down for you, because we're going to be talking about this in chapter number 4. It even has a hands-on activity that you can do. So I click Start Learning, and you can see it's going to give you the HTTP methods, or what's commonly referred to as the HTTP verbs: post, get, put, patch, delete. And it opens a little lab right over here for you. And then take a look at this. Okay, all I have to do is click the arrow, and it sends that request right over here. So take a look. If I want to go to useless facts, and actually I'm going to steal this. So it's a quick API call to useless facts. And so the useless fact is Hershey's Kisses are called that because the machine that makes them looks like it's kissing the conveyor belt. Okay, let's run it again. Between 25% and 33% of the population sneeze when exposed to light. I don't know about that one. Anyway, so you get the feedback in JSON format. So this is a great little way to pop in here and start the module, Introduction to Coding with APIs, and why it's important. So you can take a look at this, right? So that's one thing that you can do here. And again, I'm guiding you toward this one because when you first came into DevNet, if I come up here again, right, we go to DevNet Resources, Learning Tracks, and right here, Coding and APIs. And then they've got like a little more advanced Coding and API lab that you can dig into. Again, 100% free, 100% self-paced. But what I want to show you now is a little bit more interesting. And that is, let me get rid of that there. I think there's the search. Where did the search go? I have to go back to, yeah, right here. You'll notice up at the very top of the sort of that main page that we came into here, when I clicked on DevNet Resources, I could click on the search bar, right? So what can I search for here? Well, we're using a lot of Python. So I'm curious, what other, what Python resources might be available, might be available here. Let me type Python, and I didn't hit enter. There we go. And you hit enter and take a look at this. It's a learning lab, Introduction to Python. So let me kick that open. And again, I've demoed this for multiple classes. So module overview. All right, well, let me take a look at an Introduction to Python here, and then hands-on with Python interpreter and basics. So here are some, again, easy self-paced activities that you can work on trying the editor, right? There's that pip freeze. We're going to see this early in module 3 because they're going to create a virtual environment. And that's what they're doing here. They're creating a little virtual environment. Again, and all you have to do here, you don't have to type stuff in. You can just click execute that in the terminal. Execute that in the terminal, right? And you just kind of follow along. And then we've got some hands-on labs with Python data structures, right? And there's that type command, the list, the tuple, the dictionary, right? Unordered key value pairs. We're just talking, this is the things we're just talking about, right? But again, another phenomenal resource that you can dig into here and really hone in your skills. So this is where you're going to be doing lab 227, if I was correct. Yeah, lab 227. is the lab that you're going to be doing there in the ciscodeveloper.com. And again, the lab is going to walk you through everything. All right. So the last thing that we're going to talk about in terms of week number 2 is going to be activity 235. Now you can see here we've got the rubric, and I'm going to go ahead and pull that up. And we'll give it a second here. And while we're waiting for that to pop up, I'm going to go ahead and I just lost my train of thought. There was something I was going to take a look at here. Yeah, I just lost my train of thought. Boy, this is taking, let me download it, see if it comes down. There we go. Okay, there we go. All right. So let me increase the size of this here. So now let me make sure I'm clear on this. You can see that this comes up and it is editable. So we can edit right here, super team, right? I can put in Travis and Jennifer and Hallie. These are our team members, and Dylan. Now, this is what I wanted to say. So this is what needs to be done. And I'm gonna put you into teams this evening, right? And the teams will also be in the email that goes out first thing tomorrow morning. Are the emails helpful? Getting those reminders multiple times a week? Is that good? Okay, excellent. Yeah, I do. I just want to make sure everybody stays on track. Thank you, Dwayne. I'll take that as a compliment. So this PDF that's part of the lab, let me make sure that I stress this. Only, I know, Dwayne, I know you're kidding. Don't worry. Only the team lead, and I'll explain what the team lead is. So each team is going to elect a team lead. Only the team lead needs to turn this document in. What I do is I open this document, and if everything's filled out correctly, you got the questions are answered in here and everything, and I'm going to show you where these questions are at. This caused a lot of confusion last semester for some reason. It caused a lot of confusion. So you put your team members in. We're going to have 3 teams of 3. So nice small teams. So you put your 3 team members in here. In fact, let me get rid of Dylan. So you put your 3 team members in here. You're going to fill this information out. Again, I'm going to show you what that information is in just a second. And then you come down, you put the team members in here, their skill set and stuff. Only the team leader needs to turn in this document. So I'll have 3 of these will get turned in. 1 for each, the team leader for each team is going to turn this in. And then I look at the team members, and then based on the team members listed, that's how you get your score, right? So make sure that you list your team members in here, and they show you some of the icebreaker questions. Now, what you'll need to do, and this is going to be important, is you need to come back over here. Hold on. Is that 22? Oh, that was DevNet. I'm sorry. Yeah, that was the DevNet. I was like, wait a second. There is a much more comprehensive write-up here. All right. So here we go. So this is your this is the project activity number 1. We've got multiple project activities. You will be in the same team for each of these project activities that take place. So you're going to choose a facilitator and a recorder. So 2 people in each group will have a role. One will be the facilitator, and then you're kind of like the team lead, right? You're trying to organize when the team gets together. How do you guys want to communicate? Do you want to use WebEx Teams? You can create a room in WebEx Teams, and you can invite your other 2 teammates in there, or you can use just email, right? You can do that. So it's up to you. Or maybe you guys set up a Zoom session, or however you want to do it, right? And that's usually the facilitator's job. The facilitator is going to be the one who kind of organizes the team and keeps things moving along. And then you've got a recorder. Now, technically, the recorder could be anybody, but the recorder is the one that's probably going to be filling things out, right? And you want to make sure that everybody on the team has a copy of what you submit, that PDF, I shouldn't say of what you submit, of this PDF that you submit. Everybody on your team should have a copy of that. But remember, only the team facilitator, the team lead, needs to turn it in. So this right here, I cannot stress enough, please read this. This will describe exactly what you're doing. And again, at a high level, this is the easiest of the project activities, right? You are literally going to be put into groups. Each group is going to pick a facilitator and a recorder. You're going to do the icebreaker questions, and that's what gets put in here. You list your team members out, you put the questions in here that you're going to ask, and then the answers, so that you kind of get to know each other. It's like an icebreaker activity. And then you're going to discuss effective teamwork. You're going to read the facilitator should read the following paragraph. But again, in the online text for the course, everything you need is right here under section 235. And you have to read this. If you don't read this, like I said, last semester was really weird because I said the same thing. Right? I said, you make sure you guys read this. And I was getting questions like, wait a minute, what questions are we supposed to ask? And I'm like, well, for the icebreaker activity, they are literally listed right there, right? And they're like, well, where do we put the answers? And I'm like, well, you put the question here and the answer right there, right? So, oops, sorry, one short there. So please make sure that you read this, right? And you guys will be working together as a group. And that's your deliverable. Your team name, the team members with interests and skill sets, answers to the icebreaker questions. That is what your group is being graded on, right? And again, it's really the facilitator's role, and you guys will pick who the facilitator is going to be, to kind of keep things on track and make sure that people are meeting and that you're getting the information that you need. Again, you have an entire week to gather the information up. If you guys exchange phone numbers to text back and forth, however you want to do it, as long as you guys are doing it. So does anybody have, I'll make sure I ask this question. Does anybody have any questions on this project? Whoops, I'm sorry, I blew right by it there. This project 1 activity. Again, super straightforward. And I'm going to tell you the teams here in just 1 second. So I'll drop them into the chat, but I will also make sure that they're in every email that goes out this week. So there's no question who's on which team. Okay, so nobody has any questions. Again, this is the easiest, most straightforward activity. And the scavenger hunt is also much the same, right? The scavenger hunt is pretty straightforward. You go in there. Again, you're going to have to click around and try to hunt things down. Okay, so if there are no questions, here are your teams. So team number 1. And again, we're going to have 3 teams. So team number 1 is going to have Christy and Eric and Gavin. And let me do the shift here. And then team number 2. Oh, that's exactly what I did not want to do. Because if you do that, it pumps it out on the screen. Let me, I'm not going to let me copy it here. I wanted to get it all in one grand message here. So team number 2. Team number 2 is going to be Anj and Dylan. And Dylan, real quickly. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, there it is. D-I-L-A-N. Dylan, and we're going to have Dwayne in that group. And then our final team is everybody else. So team number 3 is going to be Ryan and Nathan and Van Schuen. All right, I think that's everybody. All right, so those are the 3 teams. In fact, let me snag this so I don't have to retype it again. And let's do this. I'm going to drop it in as an announcement all by itself. Your project team members by team. All right, so There we go. Everybody knows whose team you're on. So remember, somebody on the team is going to have to try to get everybody, again, get everybody else kind of synced up. You can do it via email, whatever the case may be. But make sure that you guys get together and you knock out this PDF, which only your team facilitator needs to turn in, along with the team member names that are in there. Now, Dwayne also brought something else up. Let me leave the page here. Dwayne brought something up, and he had mentioned that for, I think it's lab 227, Dwayne. Yes. Okay, so let me edit this real quick. Dwayne had mentioned that the lab wasn't here. And so let me do this, and I'll just put it in right here. Click here to access the lab in PDF format. All right, so we are going to, where's the upload? There it is, sorry. Yeah, so we're going to upload a document here, and that document is going to be in the downloads, and there it is. All right. And you know what? I think it's going to put it. Okay, there it is right there. Perfect. So now it is part of that activity. So you guys don't have to go hunt that down. So it's right there in the Explore DevNet resources. So that is the lab in PDF format, and you'll see there, and hopefully it'll open up a little quicker. There we go. All right. So there is the lab right there. So we are at 2051 or 851. So let me throw it out there. Are there any questions on anything that we've covered in the course so far? Any questions you have on any of the topics? Again, ChatGPT is your BFF when it comes to the Python and the programming stuff that we're going to be doing. It can definitely help you out.
Hey, Travis, I have a question.
Sure.
So the stuff that we learned this week with Python, are those like the basics that we're going to be using throughout the course? Like over and over again, or are we going to be learning, is there new stuff that we're going to be doing with Python as well?
Yeah, so you don't have to be a Python expert, but you definitely want to spend some time, some quality time with Python. And let me show you this. So to answer your question, yes, we're going to see the things that we've done so far, and especially in lab. I'm trying to get to the lab here. Sorry. There we go. So in lab 133, right? We looked at data types and variables, lists and dictionaries, the input function. We looked at if, for, and while loops, or I should say if, for, and while functions. And then we took a look at how you access files. And so we looked at that kind of like each thing sort of by itself, right? What's going to start to happen, and you're going to see that as soon as we get into chapter 3, or I keep saying module 3, when we look ahead to module 3, right? The first part of module 3 next week is a whole bunch of terminology around software development lifecycle, right? Which I'm not a fan of the first part of module 3. But then you notice right here, they've got a lab on Explore Python development tools. And so this lab is very simple lab, easy to follow along. You have every command that you need at your disposal when you do this lab. And they have you create a virtual Python environment. And they have you install, I think they have you install they have you install the requests library, right? So, so Christy, to answer your question, I think it's tag you're it. So you, Christy, are the facilitator since those other two individuals no-showed tonight. So definitely try to gather them up. Oh, and quick note, if anybody has any trouble like getting people that weren't here tonight set up or, pulled into the fold, please let me know sooner rather than later, right? But yes, okay. So on this lab here, it's pretty straightforward, right? This is a simple lab. And again, I'll do a video up that will walk you through. I'll give you some additional value add behind like, well, why you would do this. And, you know, well, what's in this directory that gets created when you create the virtual environment? But this is pretty straightforward. This is super easy, right? But what is not going to be super easy, right? And again, so we only go up to, we look at software design patterns next week. And I think, oh yeah, we look at get. And let me see something here, because I think that's where it cuts off, because module 3 gets split into 2 because there is a lot that starts. Basically, this is kind of like the last week where it's kind of like, you know, you're kind of on cruise control. And as you can see here, we're going to, yeah, we do. Okay, so we are going to do lab 3, 4, 6. So it looks like we're going to go all the way up to 3, 4. And then we finish with 3, 5, 3, 6, 3, 7. So yeah. So this lab right here, 3, 4, 6, Python classes. So this is going to take what we've already learned, and it's going to accelerate things. You're going to learn how to create your own Python functions. You're going to learn how to create your own Python methods, like the append method, and you're going to learn how to create classes because it's methods that are tied to the classes. You're going to define a function, you're going to define a class with methods. And so when you look at this, you can see it's going to give you a nice background, right? It's going to give you the code to type in here. And so as long as you're following along, you're in pretty good shape. Right? Now, if for whatever reason you were to get stuck, you can hit me up with a question. And again, excuse me, I'm sort of ahead now of where we're at. So, and you'll notice, I think I've already dropped in 2 Postman tutorials, because Postman is something that you use in module 4. So I've already dropped 2 tutorials in there for that. So my tutorials will be dropping almost a week before you get into the material that the tutorial is going to cover. So, and it would walk you through step by step as well. If that still doesn't make sense, and you're like, I'm still not clear what's going on. Again, what you can do is roll over to your new best friend, ChatGPT, and you can do the following. Hey, can you give me some examples of how to use Python classes with an explanation? Explanation. Let's see what ChatGPT can dial up for us here. All right, so here's a few examples. So there we go. So they're creating class dog. You've got the constructor, which is the _init, and then the name and the breed, and then it shows you how to instantiate or create an object out of that class, right? And the dog's name is Fido. So that's how you create your own class. And here's what I want you to think of when you hear Python class. It's just an object factory. That's all a class is it allows you to sit there and create a whole bunch of objects of that class type. So when we use the string objects, or I should say objects of class string, we can create a whole bunch of different strings, right? And here, if I was to copy this actually, right? So this class for dog, and you'll see, you know, they show you one for animal as well, but that's using, that's using a subclass. So, but an easy example of what a class would be, and let me do it here, and let's do Control L. So, and that's the class with the, and actually this may, okay, it indented, good. All right. So you can see where it says Fido there. So here I just created an object. If I say type dog1, that is from class dog, right? So that's an object that came out of the dog class factory. So what if I want to do another, I don't want a golden retriever, for whatever reason, right? I could say dog2, and dog2 is going to be, oops, sorry. And you put the class name here, dog, and then we're going to put the name of the dog. So we'll put Spike, popular dog name. And we'll put in here pit bull, probably a pit bull, right? And boom, I just created dog 2. So if I say print dog 2, oops, sorry, print dog 2, and then what do I want? I want the name of dog 2. Do I want the breed of dog 2? And so that's all a class is, right? I mean, yeah, it gets way more complicated than this, but at the basic level, and really where we're going to be dealing with it, is a class is just an object factory. And so Python's got those built-in classes, string, dictionary, list, whatever, all those built-in classes that I can create objects from. All we're doing here is I'm creating my own class, because maybe I want to write a program about dogs, or you could change the code and create, you could do class cat if you're a cat person, right? And then you put in the constructor to create it. And again, I'll describe these things later on. Name, and I don't know if cats have breeds, but sure, for now they do. And then you put self.name gets name. And then all the indentation, right? The indentation is key. And boom, that's it. I've just created a class called cat. So now if I want to instantiate cat1, and I'm laughing because I can't stand cats. Let's go with what's that cat? What's a famous cat? Like I'm trying to think of the cartoon. Garfield, thank you, the cartoon cat. Yeah. So we'll say Garfield, and is that like a Cheshire cat, or is that what is that? Does anybody know what kind of cat Garfield is, Christy? A fat one. All right, so it's going to be a fat one. And there we go. So in my program, orange tabby, too late. All right, or actually it's not too late. I can come back and let's do orange tabby. There we go. I think that's close enough. All right. So if later in my program, if I wanted to print a message out, right? So I've created this object. So now in my program, I would come in here and say, the cat Garfield is actually so there's my string, right? And I could do the following. Cat1 dot, sorry, not bread, cat1 dot breed. And I think this is going to do what I thought it would do. And there you go. That's it. That's all a class is, right? It just allows me to I can now create my own classes with my own object types. If you wanted to do cars, you could do cars. If you want to do NFL teams, you could do NFL teams. And you could load it up with data, right? And so that's all classes are right there. That's it. Again, it gets way more complex when you start to talk about inheritance and all this other stuff. But for what we're going to be doing, that's what a class is. It's an object factory. And yes, it is a bazillion times easier than Java. And like I said, if you're curious, hey, can you create a Python class for dogs that has at least 5 and I was like, I'm blacking out on the word here. I think it's descriptors. Descriptors, I think is the word I want. And let's see what it does. So it should have 5. It should be self.names. Oh, there you go. Yeah. Self.name, breed, age, weight, color, right? So now I've created this class, and now I can create a whole bunch of objects of this class type. Now this is getting a little, this is getting kind of nuts because it's using descriptors. So, but anyway, again, ChatGPT is a great resource to leverage. All right. Any other questions before we wrap things up for this evening? And you guys go off, and Christy, you try to find your group, and everybody else tries to coordinate with their group for a meeting. No questions? All right. Again, Module 2 exams activated, ready to go. 10 attempts. Take advantage of those attempts. All right. Well, I am going to stop the recording for tonight. I will have this recorded